All right, so I'll ask all of you, if you do have a question, ideally either raise your hand first if you want to talk your question, or if you're able to chat, just type into the chat. And if you can't do either because you're on your phone, but you know how to unmute yourself, then just go ahead and interrupt me and we'll kind of go from there. So before we get started, you need to know that for Nursing 110, you will have a 25 question dosage calc test that will be on Monday, February 26th, I believe is the date. Yes, during your skills lab, I believe is when that is scheduled for, but it's on that Monday. So you have between now and then to prepare for your dosage calc test. This is pretty much the only thing you're going to get other than knowing that you have a test and seeing some like practice questions. It's a 25 question test. I do believe it's on Blackboard, so it's a digital test, but I think you're still taking it in the lab. But later on, you'll have paper tests, and then they may even revert back to paper tests for 110. I don't know if they will, but if they, I will prepare you for either perspective. There should be practice testing available on Blackboard where you can take like a practice Blackboard test, and then I usually will get into that and review that after we kind of go through some sample type questions. So just to give you a heads up, it's a 25 question test. You can miss 2 and still pass the test. If you miss 3 or more, you will fail the test and you will have to remediate and then do a retake. And that remediation is usually they give you the week and then you remediate the following week. If you don't pass it on the remediation, then from what I understand, then you will basically be taken out of the 110 class and you'll have to repeat it. That's how important this test is. So I just want you to take it seriously. If you have somebody who's like procrastinating about studying for it, please just tell them to start reviewing and practicing some of these things that I'm going to be covering, because it can trip up the best of us. Even if you really are if you're really good with this math stuff, then you should be fine. And this is just a matter of fine tuning. Usually most students miss things like they round inappropriately or not at all, or they're just not sure what to do. And so I'm trying to hopefully help you navigate that. So I'll use this first review session to kind of introduce the test. And then if there's time, we'll get into some practice questions. And then for anyone that misses, or if you happen to be on a subsequent review session and they're saying like, oh, when do we talk about this? If I've already talked about it, just tell them, you could say, hey, make sure you go see the YouTube channel where this is uploaded. Also on YouTube, I will put this in its own playlist. So it'll be the 24 spring nursing or Allegheny nursing 110. So you'll see that listed there. So that way you're not looking at other 110 information, but the other information is going to be pretty consistent. So if you haven't looked at that stuff yet, you can look at it if you want to get a head start. All right. So there's a couple of rules for rounding that are important to kind of talk about first and foremost. The first thing you need to know is that when you are answering your questions, especially on the Blackboard test, sometimes it'll tell you to include your units, and sometimes it'll just tell you to include your number only, your numerical answer. So just make sure you read the directions before you hit that final submit button. Just make sure that you are following the directions. So if it tells you to include your units, include your units. If you're taking a paper test, include your units. Okay. So if your answer is 5 milligrams, 2 tablets, or 30 units, just make sure you mark those correctly. There are some rules associated with leading and trailing zeros. You don't want to have leading zeros and you don't want to have trailing zeros. you specifically don't want trailing zeros. The leading zeros, the only time you'd want a leading zero is if you have a number less than 1. Okay. If you have a number less than 1, such as 0.5, then that's fine to have a leading zero. But if it's 1, you don't need to write 0, 1 or 0, 1.5. I don't know that anyone does that, but do not include that because depending on who your instructor is or who's grading, they might mark that wrong. And then as far as trailing zeros, notice that the answer or the example was 0.5 milliliters, not 0.50 milliliters. Okay. So you want it to be very, very clear that it is 0.5, not 0.50. Don't use those trailing zeros. We'll get into some examples of these, but when you have a volume, or whenever you're rounding, if the number is greater than 1, so this is specifically for mLs, but this would apply to any type of rounding that you'll do on your test. You always, if it's greater than 1, you're going to round to the nearest 10th. Okay. Remember, the 10th is the first place past the decimal. So if you have 1.25 is the answer you get after you do your calculations, then you're going to round that to 1.3. Okay, you look at the 5 and round up. If it's 4 or fewer, then you round down, or you don't round down, you just don't round up. So you just leave it at 1.2. Okay. If you have a number, and I'll go over this again, you'll hear me repeat myself on this, so don't feel like you got to remember all this stuff. That's the bonus of coming to these frequently, is that hopefully it'll help you remember some of these things that you might get tripped up on. If you have a number less than 1, you could actually go into the thousands place if it's applicable. Like 0.5, that's the answer. That's, you don't need to worry about going to the thousands place. But if you get something like 0.969, you can go ahead and round that to 0.97. And if it's 0.963, you just leave it at 0.96. And the reason for that is that you are trying to give yourself as precise an answer as possible. And ultimately, what this comes down to is what type of syringe do you have available. If you have a syringe that can measure down to the hundredths, even to the thousandths place, then you use that. Okay. We'll discuss military time. That usually is more of a second semester, third, fourth semester question, but we'll address that at some point as well. And then, and we'll talk about the dosage available. So, all right. So this is what will be on your test. This is the breakdown. You will see 25 questions. 5 questions will come from household measurements, converting between systems. So this is where you're going to review converting from metric to metric, like milligrams to grams, micrograms to milligrams. But you're also going to be need to know how to convert ounces to milliliters, milliliters to ounces, teaspoons, tablespoons. I'll also show you pints, quarts, cups, and things like that. And like I said, we'll review that. So your first 5 questions are pretty much just straightforward, convert this to this. Okay. The next 3 questions are going to be continuing on with some more unit conversions, but it'll be something like, convert pounds to kilograms. It might be converting kilograms to grams, but I'll have to say that there's not too much of that. There's not too much of going from grams to kilograms. It's more about milligrams to grams or micrograms to milligrams, but you'll see examples and we'll cover that. Then we'll talk about intake and output questions. I'll give you some scenarios. We also do like a replacement volume to kind of discuss this, but intake and output would be associated with intake is you have, the patient is given these foods for lunch. You need to be able to discern which ones are liquids and which ones contribute to the volume that they consumed or ingested. And then you're just going to usually have to convert those into milliliters. And then know what that is. And then for an output calculation, this would be something like, let's say you're collecting the patient's urine, you're getting a collection to see how much they're voiding, and then you need to make sure that you're replacing that volume with an appropriate volume so that they don't become dehydrated. And so we'll talk about that as well. These oral-based medications, you'll have 6 questions. These are the ones that I think most students understand, get, and don't mess up on. It's one of those that, and if you've looked at any of the practice questions, it'll be like, you know, the doctor orders 500 milligrams BID of amoxicillin, and then available is 250 milligram capsules. How many capsules would you administer? And then, you know, just because you know that 250 is half of 500, that you're going to give that person 2 capsules per dose. And then we'll talk about some of the specifics and some of the things that might change with those, but that is what an oral medication is. That also can include things that are like oral suspensions. So like if you've ever had to take like a cough syrup, or, you know, those things are, it's some strength per some ml, and you'll calculate how many milliliters you'll give, or teaspoons or tablespoons. Then we'll talk parenteral medications. So you'll have 5 parenteral medications. Parenteral medications just means that there are injected. So it's either subcutaneous or intramuscular. And they are going to be calculated the exact same way you would calculate an oral suspension question. It's basically anytime you see an injection, you know that it's a liquid, and you'll learn that it's going to be milliliters predominantly. Then we'll talk about reconstitution. Reconstitution is just that there might be some information you need to figure out on the label, and to get you to what your strength is. And we'll talk about what all that means as we progress through this. And then we'll do some insulin dosages, including mixing of insulin, as well as being able to interpret a sliding scale insulin order. And so we'll cover all those. And one of the things I'm going to make is, like, I'll make a note, like a Word document for each section that we go through. And I'll show you what I've already created here. So it's not, I haven't shared it yet, but it will be available to you. And what I would recommend doing is just basically going through and creating an outline of the types of questions you're going to see. So like on here, I'm going to try and come up with 5 questions that are metric and household conversions. So we're going to specifically focus on metric and household conversions, and then go from there. Now, before I do that, there are some things that you need to know prior to answering some questions, things that you have to have memorized or learned, because they will not be given to you. You're going to need to know how to do some basic unit conversions. So let me pull up some of the basic unit conversions that you're going to need to know. Just give me one moment. Just give me a moment, because I just want to make sure we cover these here. Now, we probably aren't going to use all of these, but you might use some of them, which is why we're going to put them here, and then they'll be available to you. So some of these are things such as doing, you know, fluid measurements into milliliters. And then we're also going to see some other types of conversions that might creep up later on. So let's look at some of these here. A couple things. So first of all, this is just extra information. That's not what you need to know. So you have a teaspoon that equals 5 ml. You have a tablespoon that equals 3 teaspoons, which equals 15 ml. an ounce, which equals 2 tablespoons, which equals 6 teaspoons, which equals 30 ml. So we get a little bit exhaustive with some of these things. A cup, which equals 8 ounces, which equals 240 ml. Pint, which equals 2 cups, which equals 480 ml. Quart, which is 2 pints, which is 4 cups, which is 32 ounces, which is 960 ml. Now I will say these here, you may not see too much of. You will definitely see the first 3. Okay. But you may not see too much of these other ones, but it's good to know them because you could see them at some point in time later on when you're studying these things. So I'm just letting you know that they might creep up later on. So it's good to know these different ones. And then for your metric conversions, this is where you're just staying within the same metric system. Make sure. Okay, good. And the metric conversions that you need to know is converting grams to milligrams, milligrams to micrograms, liters to milliliters. Now these, technically, this is considered household to metric or metric to, or yeah, metric to household conversions, but we'll just leave it here since it's there. You need to know 1,000 grams is a kilogram. 1 pound of weight is 16 ounces of weight. So 16 ounces of weight is different than fluid ounces. And you might need to know that 1 meter is 100 centimeters, which is 1,000 centimeters, millimeters. So you might see some of those things, you might not. I'm just giving you a heads up just in case you do. And then your metric is just reverting back to some of these things here that are already discussed above, but I'll just go ahead and put them in here so that you have them as a reference. Okay. So you're going to have 5 questions that are basically going to address these household volume conversions. And then you're going to have 3 questions that are basically going to come in and be more of the metric, including weight-based conversions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to drop this down here since it's more relative to what's happening here. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create a study guide for you guys kind of as I go, just so you know that you're following some sort of a template. And then I'll fill it in as we kind of move along. So let's just do some practice questions. All right. So the first practice question that I'll say for something like this would be something like, let's say you have 3.5 teaspoons and you want to know how many milliliters that is. Okay. And then let's say I'm just going to give you a couple different options here. Let's say you have 1.5 tablespoons and you want to know again how many milliliters is that. Then we might have something like let's say I have 240 milliliters and I want to know how many ounces that is. And then for additional practice, we might say something like, okay, I have 1.5 cups and I want to know how many milliliters that is. If I have, let's just say half a pint, how many milliliters is that? And if I have 2 quarts, how many milliliters is that? All right. So these are some practice questions, and you'll see like I'm not following anything. I'm just trying to make some things up just to kind of give you some randomness when looking at some of these things. And And so if you are not sure how to answer some of these questions, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. That's why you're here with me. So we're going to try and do this with you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some spaces so I can write. I'll leave those there then. All right. I promise you there's a method to my madness. And the reason I'm doing this intentionally slow is just to kind of give you time to kind of, if you're writing notes or things like that, that I'm not overwhelming you. All right. Now, I teach, the method I like to use when I teach for dosage calc is dimensional analysis. Dimensional analysis is just a term for how you kind of approach and set up your problem. Now, just because I teach it that way doesn't mean you can't do it a different way. So if you have another method of practicing these types of problems or setting these types of problems and you're getting the right answer every single time, then keep doing what you're doing. I'm not here to change what you're doing, but I am going to try and show you, especially starting with these conversions, how to use dimensional analysis in a way that should help you to make sure that as you continue with your courses, that you don't make mistakes. I'll also show you alternatives, like I'll show you ordered over available and things like that. But when you're doing conversions is dimensional analysis. So the way I would do this to set up for dimensional analysis is you can start off with saying, okay, I'm looking for milliliters, so I'll start with that. Or what I do is I just set it up as if I'm reading it from left to right. I have 3.5 teaspoons. And I want to know if I can convert that to milliliters. So in order to convert that to milliliters, I need to know the conversion value between milliliters and teaspoons. Now, if there is no conversion value between two units, then obviously we can't answer the question, at least not directly. We might have to do some other converting. But the way this is written, and if you remember, I showed you up here, and we'll go back up here, we do know that the conversion for teaspoons is 5 milliliters. Okay. I'll also challenge you the next time you're in your kitchen and you're measuring out something, look at your measuring spoons, even if you'd never use those things. Look at your teaspoon. It'll also say 5 milliliters. It's a way to kind of remember that conversion. So I'm going to put the number that goes in front of teaspoons here, and I'm going to put the number that goes in front of mLs here. And before I do any kind of math, the reason I like to show dimensional analysis is because I can show you that I have eliminated teaspoons and I'm left with mLs. And then you plug this into your calculator. You multiply across the top, divide by the bottom. But we're dividing by 1, so we don't need to worry about that. So I'm just going to take 3.5 times 5. I can get my calculator out. And so I'll get an answer of 17.5 milliliters. And I'm going to do the same thing for the next couple of practice questions. But as I mentioned before, two reasons I need to keep this short and sweet. I'm in the middle of my work day and I have to switch to the next thing that I'm doing. If you guys don't know this, I'm in practice as a chiropractor, so I have a break between my morning patients and my afternoon patients, and so I felt like this would be a good time to do this, and so that's one of the reasons why I can't go longer. But I promise you, I'm going to keep these short and sweet. That way it'll keep your attention, give you some practice problems to work on. These will be available on the Google Drive for you, and you can start practicing them. And then I'll make them available, and then I'll continue to answer them on the next review. So even if you can't come, just know that it'll be available to you at the next review. So, but before I close out, any questions about anything that we talked about today, or questions that you might have about the test, or if you're good, then I'll say that we'll be done for today.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
How can we get this slide?
So the email you received from me, and then on Blackboard, there's a link for, it says like practice test problems. That's the OneDrive folder, and this will be in the Allegheny Nursing 110 folder.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. If there's no other questions, like I said, I'll be back on, and I'll be doing this every week. Wednesdays from 1:30 to 2, and Thursdays from 2:30 to 3. And if you have any other questions, just know you can also email me, and we'll go there. Oh, yes. Good question, Elias. Yes, calculators are allowed on the test. And you're welcome, Shah. Yeah, calculators are welcome, or they're going to provide you with a basic 10-key calculator. So while you're practicing these problems, make sure you're using a calculator. And I just use the one on my phone, so that's perfectly fine. So, yep, you're welcome, Cheryl. It's good to see you virtually. A win a day, you too. Okay, guys. If you're going to be on tomorrow, I'll see you tomorrow. If not, I'll see you next week. Thanks for coming.